Hello everyone, my name is Nurraisa Arias and today I'll be talking about Chapter 5. Chapter 5 is the Norman Conquest and the subjection of English from 1066 to 1200. So, the Norman Conquest was a great event that had a great effect in the development of English. We can say that it was the event that had the greatest effect in all this process. This one happened near to the end of the Old English period, and that was in the year of 1066. Without that event, we wouldn't have today in the English that we know nowadays and that we speak nowadays and in that English that we knew, studied, and spoke on the following periods that came along after that conquest, we would have the enormous number of French words, French expressions, and French literature that we have nowadays. So this one marked a significant before and after. We can say movement or sense. And to properly comprehend this event and how significant it was, we need to detail some minor events that occurred and that led that major event that was the conquest. But first, I need to speak about Normandy and what was Normandy. So I'm going to read that part. Normandy is a district that is located in 75 miles back from the Channel on the northern coast of France, directly across from England. Its name derives from the bands of Northern who settled there in the 9th and 10th centuries. So, Scandinavian people were people very adaptable. They adapt to new things very quick, and it was like easy for them. So they adopted the ideas and the customs of the French people. Normans had no problem on that. So we can make some mentions on that situation, like when it comes to movement and to battle and to army and all that, they improved that movements and that tactics that they already had, and then they had the best army that existed at that time. They also accepted Christianity, and they soon gave up to the tongue that they learned, their mother tongue, and they learned English. So we can say that the Scandinavian tongue in Normandy was forgotten, and French was the first one, or the most spoken one. So at that time, Normandy and England, the relation between them was relatively close. It was like good. But we need to move on to the year that the conquest happened. We know that that year is 1066. I already mentioned that. So in that year, William the Confessor died childless after 24 years reign in January of that year. So at that moment when he dies, England was facing the fact that they had to choose, or mainly to the choice of a new successor. At that time we had a noble, Godwin. He was the Edward's advisor, and he was a very exceptional man, and that many would think that he was the best profile and he was the one that would have been elected. But at that moment he had a son, his eldest son, Harold. He was the one elected, and he was the one that we can say England people wanted. But what happened? Harold's coronation, or Harold, I I can say that if he really deserved the crown was questioned and was challenged by William. William was the Duke of Normandy, and he was a second cousin to Edward. It seems that Edward himself had encouraged William to attach to the crown and to create the exception on his mind that he will be the successor of Edward once Edward died. So, since William challenged Harold, a battle took place. So William started out the preparation, but the England people was not prepared for that kind of things. So that led that the battle was very hard. It was very long, but at the end, William won the battle. However, even though he won the battle, he didn't attain the crown right away. He had to learn to place the southern east region of England, and then England people realized that further resistance was not useful at that moment, and then William was crowned on Christmas Day of 1066. Before that happened, William was already the king, he was already crowned, but everyone thought that since he was the successor of Edward, everything would remain the same. But no, it didn't happen that way, and that was one of the consequences that this conquest had. So they had a new nobility. Most of the part of the nobility was killed at the battle, and those ones that escaped and survived were treated as traitors. So that was one of the things that changed once that William took the crown. And moving on to that led the situation that even though William had won the battle, even though William was crowned, he was not kindly accepted, and he was not immediately accepted in the whole England. He was in fact accepted only in southeast. That was the region that I mentioned that he had to burn and to place some places so the people can like back off and to accept that he was the new king. So when he realized that was happening in the whole country, he decided to commit some campaign, some propaganda, and to show himself in a kinder way, so people can slowly accept him and to slowly accepting the fact that they had a new king, and that new king was William, and that new things were going to take place in that. So in that case, French was the language that remained in use for those higher people, the nobility, rich people, wealthy people, people with an education and all that. In English was mainly used or highly used throughout the people that were in the lower rate, lower social classes, lower status, economic and all that. But what happened? Moving on, people started to get married and to mix between them, and in that way it changed. So first, those ones that spoke French were identified as the Norman people from Normandy, and those who speak English were identified as the England people. But then things changed. It was a social situation wealthy people, French. Poor people, English. When all that marriage and all intermarriage stuff happened, those England people that were used to speak English noticed the convenience and that it was much easier and much better to simply learn French. So they slowly gave up that language that was English. They were learning French. So when it comes to the attitude that came toward English, the attitude that we can name or that we can characterize and label to that, it was indifference. English was not a language that was hated. I'm sorry guys, I had an inconvenience with the video and I had to cut it out, but I'm going to continue with the part that I was explaining before. So, as I was saying before, even though they were indifferent to that language and that they preferred French, that didn't mean that they didn't feel the need that they had to understand that language and to comprehend the people that was speaking that language. So the conclusion that was taken from that part was that very continental issues and government issues with the kingdom, with the reign, was much easier to be handled in French. And that was why French was always the language that was on top in those times. But they always faced and accepted the fact that English was a language that was also needed. I mean, English was never a language that was hated, a language that was discriminated or something like that. They were just indifference to that language because French was the one that they needed at that time, and that was, to use a word, more modern, that was more professional for those issues and those situations that they need to handle, and the nobility, kingdom, the reign, and all that. However, those two people fusioned together. There was a time that it was unable to distinguish the people as he's Norman, he's from Normandy, he's from England, and all that. They were two people, they were the same people. There still were people that were speaking English, and that English was the only language that they knew, but the majority knew English and French as well. And the minority, but the higher standard and the wealthy people knew French and spoke French. And adding up to that part that was mentioned before about the indifference of English, even though they were indifferent, there was a knowledge of English in the nobility and if the higher standards when it comes to the reign and to the kingdom. Language was a social distinguish for those persons. Rich people, French. Poor people, English. But the reign and the crown always knew that it was crucial to understand all person that lived in that region, in that country. So there was little, but there was understanding of English in the nobility and in the whole crown. They were very open when it comes to that. And as I was mentioning, English was never a language that was hated or discriminated or something like that. So those were the minor events that I mentioned that led the major event was the Norman Conquest. All that happened, the conquest happened on 1066, and from 1066 to 1200, all those changes that I was mentioning, that they accepted the importance of English, that English was slowly removed from some people and that French was the one that was learned. All the words that we gained, so we as a English learner, that it was gained from French to English. All that I had issues again with the video, and but I will finish that part and I will continue with the part that I was saying before, that was why this event was considered a great event and even one of the greatest or the greatest event in all this development and that history of English, because thanks to that event and to that conquest and to that fusion of two people, this language, English language, was transformed. It was a slightly transformation, but it was transformed. We had many words from French. Many of the literature that we study nowadays comes from French. England as well, but French people as well. And it was very significant, and it's very important to understand that, to comprehend the origin of the language, or all the transformations that the language had, and how it was created and how it was erased, the English that we speak nowadays. I liked this chapter so much. I like all historic events that had to do with battles and wars and all that, and that's why I chose the Norman Conquest. I really enjoyed studying that chapter, and I hope you had understood with the description and the introduction that I gave to you, because it's very important to have that definition in mind. So thank you so much for watching my video and to be here with me.